The halls of Orionnheim stretched far beyond what any human eye could take in. Golden crystal sparkled under the soft light of floating orbs, casting rainbows across the cold marble floors. The air vibrated faintly, humming with the energy of a civilization far older and more powerful than anything Earth had ever known. In the center of one enormous chamber, a figure sat, trembling and alone. Princess Lura of the Selthari, her delicate frame bound by chains of shining energy, stared at the floor. Her eyes, pale as moonlight, were wet with tears, and her silver hair clung damply to her cheeks. The hall was empty, yet every sound of her breathing seemed loud, painfully loud in the vast space. She had been taken from her world, stripped of her freedom and forced into a marriage that was never hers to choose. The thought of her people, the forests of her home world, the clear blue rivers she would never see again, pressed down on her like a heavy stone. She felt small, helpless, trapped. The Orien guards had left her alone for now, confident in their technology. They had bound her with the finest energy restraints their empire could produce, believing no living creature could break free. Lura had tried once long ago when her fear was still fresh, but the restraints had tightened in response to her struggle, sending waves of pain up her arms and shoulders. Since then, she had stopped resisting. She had cried instead, letting her sorrow fill the empty hall, hoping perhaps it would wash away some of the weight pressing down on her heart. But the tears had not changed anything. The chain still held. The warlord still waited. The future looked grim, darker than the shadows cast by the crystal chandeliers overhead. Outside, the corridors echoed with the sounds of the Dominion's servants. Alien beings of countless forms moved with precision, their bodies radiating strength and power. They whispered among themselves, voices like wind through metal pipes. Humans, on the other hand, were different. They were rare, outsiders from a distant planet called Earth. The Oriens considered them weak, unremarkable, amusing in their attempts at adapting to technology that even the weakest Orien child could manipulate. Most humans kept to themselves, quietly performing their tasks unnoticed by those around them. They were tolerated, not respected, but tolerance was not disdain, and disdain was not fear. One human moved differently. Lieutenant Mark Havelock had been captured months ago during a raid on one of the Orien supply ships. At first he had tried to resist, to escape, but he soon realized that the power of the Dominion was overwhelming. Yet, unlike others, he did not give up completely. He studied everything: the patterns of the guards, the timing of the patrols, the mechanisms that held the halls together. He noticed what others overlooked, and today he had been assigned a task that would put him closer to Lura than any human had ever dared: repairing the energy restraints that bound her. When he entered the hall, he did not rush. The guards had instructed him to be fast, to fix the device without making eye contact, without engaging the prisoner. But he paused at the threshold. He saw Lura. He saw her sorrow, her despair, her feeling that all was lost, and he could not look away. There was something in her that stirred a sense of responsibility in him, something that reminded him of the human values he had carried across the stars: courage, hope, and the unwillingness to accept that the impossible is always impossible. "Princess," he said quietly, activating the translator implant that converted his words into the tones her ears could understand. "I'm here to fix the restraints." His voice was soft but firm. There was no fear in it, no condescension, just a human presence that seemed almost alien in its simplicity, a warmth that contrasted with the cold precision of the Orien Hall. Lura blinked, uncertain. Most beings who came near her were either indifferent or cruel. This human seemed neither. She studied him, her tears drying slightly, curiosity mingling with disbelief. "I do not trust humans," she whispered, her voice trembling. The chains around her wrists glowed faintly, responding to the aura of despair and anger she radiated. Mark nodded, understanding. Trust could not be demanded. It had to be earned, slowly, quietly. He knelt beside her, careful not to touch the restraints directly, respecting both the technology and the dignity of the captive. "You don't have to trust me," he said, "but you should know that you are not a trophy. You are a hostage, and hostages can escape." His words were simple, almost mundane, but they carried a power that surprised Lura. No one had ever said anything like that to her since she had been captured. No one had looked at her and seen her as a being with choices, with agency. She wanted to believe him, even as her mind screamed that hope was dangerous. Mark examined the restraints with practiced eyes, noting the subtle weaknesses the Orions had overlooked. He worked carefully, the tools in his hands moving with precision and intent. Lura watched him fascinated. Humans were fragile in body, yet their ingenuity was unmatched. They did not rely on brute force or psychic powers. They relied on thinking, observation, and clever use of limited resources. And here was one, kneeling beside her, attempting to turn her despair into something more. A plan. As the minutes passed, the tension in the hall grew. The guards outside occasionally passed by, their heavy footsteps echoing through the corridors. Mark's movements never faltered. His calmness seemed to transfer to Lura like a gentle current of reassurance. She felt her own panic ease slightly. Perhaps, just perhaps, all was not lost. Perhaps the story of her life was not finished, despite the chains, despite the warlord, despite the darkness. Finally, Mark produced a small metallic object from his toolkit. It was crude, simple, nothing that could impress an Orion engineer. A detonator barely larger than Lura's hand, built from materials the Dominion could not recognize. He handed it to her, his fingers brushing lightly against hers. The touch was human, real, and it made her heart skip. Her instincts screamed at her. Danger, risk, certain death. But another voice, quieter, deeper, whispered that this human might be the key. That hope could exist even in the darkest place. Keep this safe, Mark said. Use it when the time is right. And remember, I will be near. You are not alone. Lura took the device, feeling its weight, feeling the significance of the gesture. She nodded faintly, a spark of determination lighting her eyes. For the first time since her capture, she felt a sense of agency. She was not just a pawn in a game of political power. She was a living being who could act, who could make choices, who could fight. The Orion guards drew closer, their movements precise, almost mechanical. Mark stood slowly, preparing himself. He looked at Lura and gave her a small, reassuring nod. Then, with a suddenness that startled even him, the first guard entered the room, checking on the prisoner. Mark's mind raced, thinking faster than he had ever needed to before. Every second counted. Every move was a risk. But the human ability to improvise, to adapt in real time, gave him an advantage the Orions had not anticipated. The guard paused, noticing the human engineer in the chamber. He stepped forward, suspicion flashing across his dark eyes. Mark did not panic. He raised his hands in the universal gesture of compliance, his body language calm and controlled. The guard hesitated, and in that pause, Mark's plan moved forward. The tiny device in Lura's hand could change everything. If only they had courage. If only they dared to act. The chain around her wrist pulsed, humming with energy. The warlord's presence was felt even at a distance, a shadow of authority that stretched across the hall. But Mark met the alien gaze with the quiet defiance only a human could sustain. He was small, fragile, yet unyielding, and Lura, watching him, felt a flicker of hope ignite. For the first time in weeks, she stopped crying. She lifted her head, meeting his eyes. In that silent exchange, a new story began, one where despair did not rule, where courage could exist even in the darkest places, and where the small, underestimated human could change the fate of a captive princess. The golden hall of the Orion Dominion no longer seemed endless or insurmountable. A plan was forming. A spark had been lit. And somewhere deep inside, Lura felt that perhaps, against all odds, her life could be hers once more. The first step had been taken. The chains were still there, the warlord's power still looming, but now for the first time the possibility of escape, of defiance, of survival, felt real. And in that possibility lay the greatest power of all, hope. The golden hall of the Orion Dominion seemed silent, but every corner whispered threats. Lura's heart beat fast, not with fear but with anticipation. The small device Mark had given her rested in her palm, almost impossibly light yet filled with potential. She could feel its strange energy, a human creation unlike anything the Orions had known. It hummed faintly, syncing with the rhythm of her pulse. For the first time, she was not just waiting. She was planning. Mark stood a few steps away, his eyes scanning the room. He had learned the patterns of the guards over weeks of careful observation. Each footstep, each pause, each gesture had meaning. The humans might be small, fragile, and unarmed in a world dominated by strength and psychic power, but they had one advantage the Orions had underestimated: the ability to think, improvise, and act unpredictably. Mark adjusted the straps of his uniform, trying to look like a simple engineer while hiding the quiet confidence in his posture. His gaze met Lura's, and in that brief glance he communicated everything he could not say aloud. Wait for the right moment. Trust yourself. We can do this. The first guard approached the dais, his massive frame casting a shadow over Lura. His steps were slow, measured, like a predator testing the boundaries of its prey. Lura's hands trembled, but she held the detonator firmly. Mark whispered in a low, hurried tone, "Now, when he's close enough, press it. I'll distract him." Her eyes widened. Could she really do it? Her fear screamed at her to stay still, to wait for someone else to act. But the human's confidence gave her strength. She took a deep breath, focusing on the feeling of control rather than the chains around her wrists. The guard's fingers brushed against the energy bindings. He did not notice the small human signals. Mark stepped forward, his voice calm but firm. "Hold still. The equipment is malfunctioning." The guard paused, tilting his head. He had expected compliance from the human, not resistance. Mark's tone carried a subtle command, an unspoken assertion that humans were unpredictable, dangerous in their own way. In a flash, Lura pressed the detonator. The device hummed, a bright pulse of light rippling outward. The energy chains flared, then shattered with a sharp, resonating crack. Sparks danced in the air as the restraints dissolved, freeing Lura's hands and arms. The guard stumbled back in surprise, his confidence faltering. Mark lunged, creating a distraction, pulling the guard away from her path. Lura rose to her feet, her legs shaky but steady. For the first time in weeks, she could move freely. Mark extended a hand. "Quickly, follow me." Lura grasped it without hesitation. Together they moved toward the corridor. Every step was a calculated risk. Patrols could appear at any moment, and the warlord could sense disturbances even from a distance. But humans thrived on risks. They calculated, adapted, and survived where others relied solely on strength or fear. The halls twisted like a maze. Golden walls reflected their images, creating illusions of movement that could confuse even the most experienced Orion guards. Lura's mind raced. She had never known such vastness in a building before. It seemed endless, but Mark had memorized the routes. He led her through hidden doors, small maintenance passages, and service tunnels the Orions overlooked. Their steps were silent, careful, precise. A group of guards appeared around a corner. Their psychic energy pulsed faintly, a warning that their senses were more than physical. Mark whispered, "Stay calm. Watch and follow." He pressed himself against the wall, signaling Lura to do the same. The guards passed, unaware of the human and the alien princess moving just beyond their sight. Lura marveled at Mark's skill. Humans were small, weak, and underestimated. Yet here he was, navigating a world of giants, bending their rules without breaking them. They reached a junction where the path split into multiple corridors. One path led deeper into the heart of the Dominion, the other toward the exit. Mark examined the walls, finding a hidden panel with a series of buttons and switches. "This is it," he whispered. "I can override the security here, but it will take a few minutes. You need to be ready." Lura nodded, determination settling over her like armor. She no longer felt like a captive. She felt like a participant in her own story. Mark worked quickly, his hands moving with practiced efficiency. Wires connected, circuits hummed, and a panel lit up green. "Done," he said softly. "The door will remain open just long enough for us to pass. After that, alarms will trigger." Lura took a deep breath, steadying herself. The fear that had haunted her for weeks was replaced by resolve. She was no longer powerless. She was part of a plan, and she trusted the human beside her. They slipped through the door into a dimly lit corridor. The lights flickered, and for a moment Lura thought she heard distant alarms. But the passage remained clear. Mark led her down twisting hallways, avoiding patrols and security nodes. Every corner brought a new challenge, a new test of their courage and ingenuity. But each obstacle also reminded Lura of the power of human intelligence and determination. Mark, with his simple tools and careful mind, was achieving what seemed impossible. Finally, they reached a larger chamber, one that opened into a transport dock. Ships of the Orion Dominion were docked in rows, their sleek designs gleaming in the artificial light. A single small shuttle awaited, powered down and nearly invisible to sensors. Mark checked the control panel. "This one will get us off the planet. It's not fast, but it will be enough." Lura's heart soared. Freedom was close. She felt the thrill of possibility, a sensation she had almost forgotten. But their path was not unopposed. A warlord's lieutenant appeared at the far end of the chamber, massive and dark, his presence commanding. He had sensed the disturbance, the breach of security, and moved to intercept. Mark held up a hand. "Stay behind me," he said. The human's voice carried calm authority, unshaken by the looming threat. Lura watched in awe. This small human, who could have been crushed by a single Orion hand, faced down an enemy without fear. The lieutenant advanced, his steps echoing. Mark grabbed a nearby tool, a human-made device that emitted a blinding pulse of light. He activated it, temporarily disorienting the lieutenant. In that moment, Lura ran toward the shuttle, her legs moving faster than she had thought possible. She reached the entrance and helped Mark climb aboard. Together they activated the controls, the shuttle's engines roaring to life. As the vessel lifted from the dock, Lura looked back at the sprawling city below. The golden towers, the shining halls, the empire that had seemed invincible, all of it receded into the distance. And yet she did not feel hatred or fear. She felt respect. She felt amazement at what a small, underestimated human had accomplished. Mark's ingenuity, courage, and refusal to accept helplessness had changed her fate. The shuttle soared into the atmosphere, escaping the immediate reach of the Orion Dominion. Lura, for the first time since her capture, allowed herself to smile. She was free, not because of strength or power alone, but because of intelligence, courage, and the unyielding spirit of a human. Mark glanced at her, returning the smile. Words were not necessary. They had achieved what many would have called impossible. Together they had defied an empire. As they sped away from Orion 9, Lura's thoughts turned to her people, her home world. There would be time to return, to fight for freedom, to rebuild what had been lost. But for now she savored the moment of liberation. She had seen despair and she had met hope. She had felt fear, and she had experienced courage. And she had learned something she would never forget. Humans were small, fragile, and underestimated, but they were capable of greatness that could change the course of the universe. The stars stretched before them, endless and full of possibility. Lura knew their journey was only beginning, but she also knew this. As long as humans like Mark existed, no darkness was too deep, no chains too strong, and no empire too vast. The galaxy had witnessed the beginning of something new, a reminder that hope, courage, and intelligence could overcome even the greatest of odds. And in that moment, she finally understood that her life, her choices, and her destiny were hers to command once more.